Once upon a time, not too long ago, there was a young man in Burkina Faso. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. In fact, almost nobody knew his name. He was just a regular soldier, training at a dusty military camp, probably waking up early, running laps, and learning how to take orders. Someone snapped a photo of him during that time, around 2009 or 2010. He looked quiet, focused, maybe even a little unsure of what the future held. That young man? His name was Ibrahim Traoré. At the time, he had no idea that one day he would become the youngest president in the world. And yet, here we are. Looking back at that photo, you can't help but think, if you don't believe in yourself, if you're not ready to keep going when things get hard, then maybe you're not ready to lead a fight. Because real change takes strength, not just in your muscles, but in your heart. Nobody's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. But sometimes, someone unexpected rises up, not because they were the loudest or the richest, but because they believed in something bigger than themselves. Ibrahim Traoré became a leader through a bold, controversial path. Some people call it a coup, others call it a turning point. Either way, he took a risk many wouldn't dare to take. Now, fast forward to 2023, he stood in front of powerful people at the Afro-Russian summit in St. Petersburg. Right beside world leaders like President Vladimir Putin, he didn't stay quiet. He spoke. He talked about unity, about family, about how Africa and Russia could build something new, something that didn't involve outsiders always telling African countries what to do. And something surprising happened. His words echoed another voice from long ago, a man named Frederick Douglass, who once spoke out against slavery in the 1800s. Douglass had said that if a person refuses to fight for their freedom, they will remain in chains forever, and they shouldn't expect pity. Those were strong words, but they weren't about being cruel. They were about waking people up. Traoré, even as a young man, understood those words, not just the sentence, but the feeling behind them. He wasn't quoting for show. He'd read the books. He'd felt the weight of those ideas. And when he spoke, it was like those old words were coming back to life. Some critics from the West call him a military junta leader, like it's a warning label. But when Traoré hears that, he doesn't flinch. He seems to understand that history is full of labels. Some are used to silence people, others to describe those who break free. And for those who've followed his journey, listened to his speeches, and watched the choices he makes, they say it's like something deep and rare is happening again. What one writer once called metempsychosis, the idea that a spirit or energy can return in another form to finish what was left undone. There's an old belief, an idea some people around the world have shared for centuries. It says that when someone full of courage and purpose leaves this world, their spirit doesn't just vanish. Instead, it moves, floating through the air until it gently finds a new home in someone else. Someone who carries on that same fire, that same mission. Now, imagine this. In 1987, Burkina Faso lost one of its greatest heroes, Thomas Sankara. He was brave, honest, and determined to change his country for the better. When he was taken from the world, something deeper may have happened, something no one could see. A year later, in a small place called Bondoukoui, a baby boy was born. His name, Ibrahim Traoré. People say he carries the same spirit of Sankara, strong, fearless, and driven by justice. The idea that one spirit could rise again in a new leader may sound magical, but for many in Burkina Faso, it feels real. They see it in the way Captain Traoré walks, speaks, and lives. And not just the way he talks about freedom, but the way he lives it, day by day. Now, let me tell you something special, something you might not have heard about this young president. He doesn't live in a golden palace. He doesn't drive flashy cars. He still takes the salary of a regular soldier, just like when he started. Even after rising to the highest seat of power in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré chose a simple life. Not because he had to, but because he believes that leadership is about service, not luxury. In just 2 years, he's shaken things up. He's faced betrayal, threats, and even a secret plan to remove him, with billions of CFA behind it. But he didn't back down. Instead, he stood taller, stronger. And if you're still wondering, who is this man really? Well, let's go back to the beginning. He was born on March 14, 1988, in a village called Kera, in the Mohun province of Burkina Faso. He went to primary school right there in Bondokui and later moved to Bobo Dioulasso, a big city full of energy and learning. People who knew him then say he was quiet, focused, smart, not loud or flashy. Just a young boy with big thoughts and a calm spirit. Unlike many others who dreamed of being soldiers from a young age, Traoré started out like any regular civilian. It wasn't until later that he joined the army, and that decision would change everything, not just for him, but for his entire country. Welcome to the journey of a man who many say didn't just rise to power, he returned to fulfill something greater. In 2006, a young man named Ibrahim Traoré packed his bags and headed to the capital city of Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou. He wasn't going to chase fame or fortune. He was going to study rocks, seriously. He enrolled in Joseph Kizerbo University to learn geology, which is the science of the earth, like studying mountains, earthquakes, and everything under the ground. But it didn't take long for people to notice something special about him. Ibrahim wasn't just smart. He stood up for his classmates, spoke out when things weren't fair, and was chosen to represent them as a delegate. By the time he graduated, he'd earned not just good grades, but respect. Then, in 2009, he made a big move, one that surprised a lot of people. He decided to join the army. He didn't go to the top-tier military school where famous leaders like Thomas Sankara once trained. Instead, he enrolled at George Namoano Military Academy, a less well-known place. But that didn't stop him. By 2012, he had graduated and was sent to Morocco for special anti-aircraft training. When he returned, he joined an infantry unit in Kaya, a town in the north of Burkina Faso. In 2014, his journey took a huge turn. First, he got promoted to lieutenant, and then something even bigger happened. He was deployed to Mali as part of a United Nations peacekeeping mission called MINUSMA. This was serious business. He was sent to help calm one of the most dangerous regions, where armed groups and rebels were causing chaos. It was in Tombouctou, a legendary city in northern Mali, that Traoré faced his first real test under fire. In 2018, during a complicated attack by militants, he showed true bravery and calm under pressure. But he didn't stop there. In 2019, he was back home in Burkina Faso, joining a long military campaign known as Operation Djibo, part of a wider push in the troubled eastern region. The goal? Push back the armed fighters who were spreading fear and violence. Traoré spent 7 months in intense operations across the east and later the north. These missions were tough. Even when they worked in one place, trouble would pop up somewhere else. He was also stationed in Marcoye, a dangerous part of the country known as the Three Borders Zone, where Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all meet. It's one of the hardest places in the region to patrol because of how active armed groups are there. And yet, Traoré was right on the front line. Soldiers who served with him said he wasn't just brave, he was loyal, strong-willed, and always close to his team. In 2020, he earned the rank of captain. But that same year, things were getting worse across the country. Many young officers, including Traoré, were growing frustrated. They were risking their lives, while some of the leaders above them seemed unable, or unwilling, to stop the rising threat of the militants. There's one moment people still talk about from 2020. The town of Barcelogo was in serious danger. Militants were closing in, and no one could get in by road. The main highway was probably filled with hidden bombs. So, Traoré made a bold call. He led his unit on foot, trekking across rough countryside to get there, and they made it, just in time to free the town. In Burkina Faso, life in some regions has become really tough. Armed groups, often called jihadists, have been causing chaos. Their attacks come in many forms: roadside bombs, ambushes, kidnappings, carjackings, and even rockets. It's dangerous, and the parts of the country that are suffering the most are the Sahel, the north, the central north, and the east. Now let's zoom into what happened next. Chapter 2, From Soldier to President. By the end of 2021, things had reached a breaking point. Many families didn't have enough food. About 1 out of every 4 people in Burkina Faso was struggling to eat. And by September 2022, the numbers were heartbreaking. More than 3,000 people had lost their lives. That's even more than the entire year before. On top of that, over 2 million people had been forced to leave their homes. So, what happened? In January 2022, a man named Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba led a military coup. Basically, the army stepped in and removed the president at the time, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. President Kabore had been in office since 2015. He came in after Michel Kafando, who led a short-term transitional government that followed a huge popular uprising in 2014. That revolution kicked out Blaise Compaoré, a leader who had ruled for 27 years after rising to power in 1987, the same year that Thomas Sankara, the country's revolutionary hero, was assassinated. Damiba said the reason for the coup was that Kabore had failed to stop the growing attacks from jihadists. So after taking over, Damiba created something called the Patriotic Movement for the Safeguard and Restoration, or MPSR for short. He said the plan was simple: take back the country from armed groups and help the millions of displaced people return home. Captain Ibrahim Traoré joined the MPSR too. At that point, he was already a respected soldier. In March 2022, Damiba promoted him to lead the artillery unit in Kaya, right in the center of the country. But here's the twist. This promotion would later open the door for something no one saw coming. Even though Damiba promised to protect the people, things on the ground kept getting worse. The attacks didn't stop. In fact, militants started capturing even more land. Cities were getting surrounded, people were still running for their lives, and many soldiers, especially the ones stationed far from the capital, weren't getting paid on time. Frustration grew, and deep in the ranks of the army, young officers started to wonder if the leadership was out of touch with what was really happening in the field. Captain Traoré was one of them. In the army camp, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré was stationed, things were tense. The young soldiers were tired of fighting, tired of waiting, and most of all, tired of feeling like no one in charge was listening. Traoré wasn't just any officer. His fellow soldiers respected him. So when frustration boiled over, they turned to him. They asked him to be their voice. He traveled to Ouagadougou, the capital, to speak directly with President Damiba, the leader who had taken power earlier that year. Traoré wanted to explain what life was really like for the soldiers out in the field, what they were facing, what they needed. But his requests were ignored. No response, no meeting, just silence. Meanwhile, the people in charge were seen sitting in cool, air-conditioned offices in the capital while the north of the country was being attacked. In places like Djibo, a city with over 60,000 people, jihadist groups had been surrounding and cutting it off from the rest of the country for more than a year. Then came the moment that broke everything. On September 26, 2022, a huge convoy, 150 trucks filled with food, was headed to Djibo to help the people stuck there. But before it could reach the city, it was ambushed. The attack killed 37 people, including 27 soldiers. The convoy never made it. The city stayed trapped, and the army was devastated. This was the last straw. Back in Ouagadougou, the anger was growing. Just days earlier, President Damiba had flown to New York with a delegation of 70 people to attend the United Nations Summit. He told the world that Burkina Faso was making progress and asked for support. But at home, people were furious. Soldiers felt abandoned. Citizens wondered how a government could talk about progress while the country was under siege. Traoré tried again to meet with Damiba. Still nothing. So, on the morning of September 30th, 2022, gunfire rang out across the capital. Something serious was happening. By 8 p.m., the whole country was watching. A young soldier in uniform appeared on national television. He wore a red beret, a bulletproof vest, and stood in front of a group of masked, helmeted soldiers. That man was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He calmly announced that he was now the new leader of the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, or MPSR. The government of Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba had been removed. Traoré and his fellow officers said they had no other choice. They accused Damiba of losing focus, of ignoring the promises made during the first coup in January. Instead of protecting the country and helping the people, they said he had drifted into politics. They also said something important. They had tried to fix things peacefully, but when no one listened, they had to act. Many of the youngest soldiers had carried the heaviest weight in the fight against the armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. Some elite soldiers, like those in the famous Cobra unit, were even missing their pay. They were risking their lives while feeling forgotten. And when people feel ignored for too long, sometimes they decide to rewrite the story themselves. On the morning of September 30th, something big happened in Burkina Faso. A group of soldiers, frustrated with how things were going, decided to take action. At the center of it all was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young officer with growing support, especially from an elite group of soldiers known as the Cobra unit. They played a major role in what quickly became a full-blown military takeover. Traoré and his team didn't hide their reasons. They promised to focus on what really mattered, keeping the country safe, protecting its borders, and standing up for the rights of all Burkinabe citizens. They also said it was time for Burkina Faso to build stronger and more balanced partnerships around the world, especially in the fight against terrorism. But soon, things got more complicated. The next day, October 1st, rumors began to spread. Traoré and his fellow officers accused former leader Damiba of hiding inside a French military base. They claimed he was trying to organize a counterattack. Now, many people in Burkina Faso were already feeling angry about what they saw as too much foreign influence, especially from France. So when those accusations came out, emotions exploded. Even though the French government denied everything, thousands of people hit the streets in Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso, protesting in front of French buildings and embassies. What started as a military move suddenly became a people's uprising, not just against Damiba, but also against outside interference. That night, the tide turned in favor of Captain Traoré. More soldiers joined his side, including members of the Air Force and Special Forces. The next morning, Damiba agreed to step down, but only if he and his close allies would be kept safe. 6 days later, the world watched in surprise. Ibrahim Traoré, only 34 years old, arrived early at the swearing-in ceremony. He was dressed in full military gear. His steps were calm but strong, like someone who had been on the battlefield, not a fancy politician walking into a big event. One thing stood out: he wore a face mask. Some said he didn't want the cameras to catch his full expression. Others believed it added mystery to this young, unexpected leader. Then came the big moment. Someone handed him a short document, just a few lines in French. With his hand raised, he made a promise. He swore to protect the Constitution, to follow the rules of the transition, and to bring justice to all the people of Burkina Faso. That day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré became the youngest head of state in the world. In the streets, people celebrated. Some danced, some waved flags. For many, it felt like hope had returned. To understand just how young he is, if you doubled his age and added 19 more years, that's how old Paul Biya, the president of Cameroon, is. Biya is Africa's oldest leader at 91. But Traoré isn't interested in age or status. He's not chasing titles or trying to look fancy in suits. Instead, he says he's here for one thing: to rescue his country. He says he's willing to give up everything to bring back peace and freedom to Burkina Faso. No sacrifice is too big, he declared. We will always follow one guide: the people. As more people started paying attention to the rise of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, some observers began asking tough questions. Was he getting help from outside Burkina Faso? And if so, from who? It didn't take long for some eyes to turn toward Russia, and more specifically, St. Petersburg. Petersburg, where one of the most powerful leaders in the world, Vladimir Putin, resides. Just 2 days after the coup in Burkina Faso, news outlets began buzzing. A journalist named Elian Peltier from the New York Times claimed he had found clear signs that a shadowy Russian group, known as the Wagner Group, had been quietly involved in what Traoré had done. Then another journalist, Edward McAllister from Reuters, added fuel to the fire. He said that anyone trying to go up against Traoré should think twice, because Russia was standing behind him, and standing firm. But what did Traoré have to say about all this? He didn't dodge the question. When asked by France 24, Traoré pushed back on the claims. He said he didn't need soldiers from Wagner because Burkina Faso already had its own defenders, brave locals known as the VDP, or Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland. These were citizens, not foreign fighters, willing to protect their land with everything they had. Still, suspicions didn't fade. On September 27, 2023, Traoré showed up at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. And there, he spoke with clarity and emotion. He said Russia felt like family to Burkina Faso. And not just Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. He reminded the audience that both Africans and Russians had made huge sacrifices during World War II, even though their stories were often left out of history books. African grandfathers were sent to Europe to help defeat the Nazis, while Russia lost millions of lives fighting the same battle. So when Traoré said, "We are the forgotten peoples of the world," it struck a chord. He was talking about shared struggle, shared strength, and a bond that, in his eyes, was real and lasting. After hearing that, many people said, "There it is." Traoré isn't just working with Russia, he's proud of it. He didn't hide it, he called them brothers. And that moment convinced a lot of observers that Traoré and Moscow were on the same page. Back when he first took power, Traoré promised that elections would be held by July 2024, a step toward returning to democracy. But then came another big twist. On May 25, 2024, the military government announced that the transition would be extended for 5 more years, with Traoré staying in power during that time. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré decided to extend his stay in power by 5 more years, it left people divided. Some supported the decision. Others, both in Burkina Faso and around the world, started to worry. Was the dream of returning to civilian rule slipping away? At the same time, something else was happening. Traoré wasn't just making changes at home, he was changing how Burkina Faso talked to the rest of the world. The country's relationship with France, its former colonial ruler, was already rocky when he came to power. But it got even more tense after huge crowds started marching in the streets. They weren't just upset, they were calling for the French military to leave. And they weren't alone. Across West Africa and the Sahel, more and more people were speaking out, frustrated with foreign influence, especially from France. Traoré listened. In January 2023, Burkina Faso gave France 1 month to pack up and leave. They ended the military agreement that had allowed French troops to operate on Burkinabe soil. The reason? Traoré said it was time for Burkina Faso to defend itself, on its own terms. 1 month later, in February, the decision became official. In a quiet but powerful ceremony, the French flag was lowered at the last French military base in the country. Just like that, a chapter closed. Since the day of the coup, Traoré has been easy to recognize. He doesn't wear shiny suits or polished shoes. Instead, he's always dressed for the field. Military fatigues, red beret, tactical gloves, and a pistol strapped to his leg. It's more than a look, it's a message. I'm still a soldier. I'm still with the people on the ground. So that raises a big question. What kind of life does the world's youngest president actually live? Does he drive around in flashy, expensive cars? Does he sleep in a palace with marble floors and golden furniture? Is he living like many other leaders, far away from the struggles of ordinary people? That brings us to Chapter 3, Leadership Philosophy and Actions. When Ibrahim Traoré became president, he didn't follow the usual script. While many African presidents move into grand homes, enjoy luxury perks, and receive massive salaries, Traoré chose something radically different. He refused the official $76,000 presidential salary. Instead, he kept earning what he made as a military captain, a lot less money. That's not something many leaders do, but for Traoré, it was a statement. He didn't want to be seen as a ruler above the people. He wanted to show that leadership could mean sacrifice, not comfort. Because for him, being president wasn't about privilege, it was about purpose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré made a choice that surprised a lot of people, especially in a world where leaders often chase power, money, and luxury. But he didn't just want to lead Burkina Faso, he wanted to serve it. From the beginning, he put his people before himself. And what he's done in just 2 years is something most leaders dream of doing in an entire lifetime. Let's start with something simple but powerful, his paycheck. In Burkina Faso, the president normally earns $76,000 a year. That's a big amount, especially when you consider that the average person in Burkina Faso earns about $73 a month. But instead of keeping that high salary, Traoré said, "No, thank you." He chose to keep his regular military pay as a captain, but he didn't stop there. He also cut government salaries by 20%, saying, "If we want real change, we all have to make sacrifices." That money, he didn't stash it away or use it to build a palace. He invested it straight back into the country. With those funds, his government began building schools so more children could learn modernizing agriculture, so farmers could grow more food with less struggle, opening textile factories to create jobs and support local industries, creating tomato processing plants, so the country didn't have to rely on imports, and even laying the foundation for oil refineries so Burkina Faso could fuel its own future. These aren't quick-fix projects. They're long-term investments, steps that could change the country for generations to come. And through it all, Traoré has stayed the same. He drives a simple car, wears his military uniform, and lives modestly, a far cry from many other African presidents who surround themselves with expensive cars, private planes, and giant mansions. But Traoré isn't trying to impress anyone with wealth. He believes leadership means serving, not showing off. That's why so many people have started comparing him to another legendary figure in Burkina Faso's history, Thomas Sankara. Like Sankara, Traoré stands for humility, honesty, and action. He's proving that being close to the people, living like them, listening to them, working for them, can build a stronger nation than any gold-plated palace ever could. While others chase power for themselves, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has chosen service over status and people over perks. Real leadership isn't about flashing cameras or showing off a perfect family photo, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré seems to understand that better than most. Unlike many presidents who proudly display their personal lives, posing with their spouses, children, and extended families, Ibrahim Traoré has chosen a different path. You won't find photos of his wife or kids online. You won't hear stories about fancy dinners or birthday parties in the palace. That's because Traoré keeps his private life completely out of the spotlight. His focus, not on selfies or attention, but on Burkina Faso's future. This level of humility and dedication is rare, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world. At just 28 years old, Traoré started showing people that real leadership has nothing to do with riches or personal fame. While others chase wealth and comfort, he doubled down on service, simplicity, and action. He challenged the idea that a leader must be rich to be powerful. He flipped the script, showing that a leader can be strong and still live simply. He chose to serve the people first, not promote himself. And it's already made a big impact in Burkina Faso. People see him as more than just a president. He's become a symbol of something new, a hopeful kind of leadership that doesn't put politicians above the people, but right beside them. But this story isn't just about praise and progress. It's also about danger and how Traoré's bold choices nearly cost him everything. Let's rewind to November 8th, 2024. On that day, a terrifying plan was uncovered. A group of people, some with powerful connections, had organized a secret mission to remove Traoré from power. It wasn't a loud attack. It didn't start with tanks or gunfire. It started with money. A mysterious man entered the country claiming to be on a business trip, but he wasn't there for trade. He came carrying 5 billion CFA francs, that's over $8 million, and his real goal was to bribe soldiers into turning against their president. The money wasn't meant for schools or hospitals, it was meant for a coup. The plan was to use that cash to buy loyalty, stir up trouble, and quietly flip the government from the inside. Why? Because Burkina Faso is rich in gold and minerals, and where there are resources, there are always people, especially from outside the country, looking for ways to take control. The man behind the plot was reportedly connected to foreign interests who hoped to use Burkina Faso's challenges as an opportunity to grab power and profit. But the country's military, loyal to the people, didn't let it happen. The plan was exposed and stopped, and the suspect was arrested before the operation could unfold. That day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré survived not just another crisis, but a full-scale attempt to erase everything he had started. As Burkina Faso began to steady itself and push back against instability, not everyone was cheering. In fact, some powerful groups from outside the country saw this progress as a problem, because a strong, independent Burkina Faso meant less control for them. So a plan was hatched. The idea? bribe the soldiers, offer them big piles of money in exchange for loyalty. Then, once the trust of a few key soldiers was secured, cause enough chaos to shake the leadership and shift power. But things didn't go the way the plotters expected. The soldiers they approached were not ordinary recruits. These were men who had stood firm on the front lines, fighting extremists, terror groups, and risking their lives to protect their people. When someone tried to buy them out, they didn't say no directly. Instead, they said nothing, and quietly reported everything to their commanders. For weeks, they played along. They gathered names, recorded conversations, tracked the plan. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Until finally, the military had enough to move. On the day of the planned deal, a sting operation was launched. At a quiet warehouse, soldiers moved in and arrested the suspect. Inside his suitcase, a stash of cash meant to fund a coup. The room had been wired with hidden cameras. Every moment had been recorded, every detail captured. But what they found went deeper than just one man with money. This wasn't a small-time plot. It was part of a much bigger operation involving foreign operatives and mercenaries already active in the Sahel region. The plot had links to outside powers, with big interests in West Africa's gold, minerals, and land. These foreign interests had one goal: keep Africa dependent. And now, a country like Burkina Faso, taking back control of its own resources, was seen as a threat to their profits and plans. This wasn't just about one coup. It was about stopping a movement toward independence. The arrest exposed something huge. Some people will go to great lengths to keep control over Africa's wealth, even if it means destroying the peace. But it also showed something stronger. Burkina Faso is not easy to break. The soldiers who were offered millions chose their country instead. Now, with all this happening behind the scenes, what about the work Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done in plain sight? What major changes has he made in the 2 years since stepping into power? Let's take a look. Chapter 5. Shaping the Future. By October 2025, it had been 2 years since Captain Ibrahim Traoré became the leader of Burkina Faso. And in that short time, the country had changed more than anyone expected. After rising to power through the October 2023 coup, Traoré rolled up his sleeves and got to work. And according to many observers, he has already delivered on more than 80% of the promises he made. His efforts have stretched across almost every part of life, from security to energy, healthcare, farming, and economic freedom. And now, the world is paying attention. One of the biggest projects under his leadership is the Faso Rail Project, a massive plan to build a nationwide railway network linking cities and provinces. It's 75% owned by the government and 25% backed by private investors. In Bobo Dioulasso, they're building a train parts factory to make wagons and rails right in Burkina Faso, instead of importing them. The total cost of the project is 70 billion CFA francs, about $110 million, and it's expected to be completed in just 18 months, creating thousands of jobs and helping trade move faster across the country. But that's not all. Traoré's team has partnered with Russia's Rosatom to build a nuclear power plant. This is a big leap toward clean energy, less pollution, and more electricity, especially for people in rural areas. It's also part of a bigger plan to help factories and hospitals run better with steady, affordable power. In Coup, another major project is underway, a pharmaceutical technopole, a center where Burkina Faso will be able to produce its own medicine instead of relying on imports. This will mean better healthcare for people and more jobs for locals. The budget? Another 70 billion CFA francs invested in the country's future. Meanwhile, Traoré's government is working to add more value to Burkina Faso's natural resources. They're building a gold refinery to process the country's gold at home. A tomato processing plant is being built to reduce food imports, and a massive agricultural reform program is providing free tractors, affordable seeds, and subsidized fertilizer to farmers. These changes have helped boost food security by over 50% in just 2 years. But Traoré hasn't only focused on building, he's also kept his eye on protecting the country. In January 2025, Burkina Faso's Rapid Intervention Battalion, along with other defense units and the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDP, carried out major operations. They eliminated dozens of terrorists in regions like Salinzo, Monte, and Queen Village, pushing back insurgents and reclaiming areas once thought lost. Military reforms, along with new alliances with Russia, Turkey, and China, brought in better weapons, training, and strategic support. Regions like Djibo, which had been cut off by violence, were liberated, reconnecting towns, reopening roads, and bringing unity back to the Sahel. And in a bold move toward African unity and independence, French was officially removed as Burkina Faso's official language, a powerful symbol of the country's commitment to Pan-African values and sovereignty. Under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, big changes haven't just happened at the top, they've reached the everyday people too. Civil servants' salaries have gone up, showing that public workers, teachers, nurses, and government employees are finally being recognized and rewarded for their hard work. At the same time, Burkina Faso's central bank has taken big steps to protect the country's financial independence from France, making it clear that the future of the nation belongs in Burkinabe hands. On the energy front, things are shining even brighter. The country has launched major renewable energy projects, including the largest hydroelectric dam in Burkina Faso's history. This dam is now bringing power to more homes, farms, and factories, helping the country grow without depending on imported fuel. And where doctors used to be out of reach in rural areas, now mobile health clinics are hitting the road. These clinics drive into remote villages, bringing checkups, medicine, and care to people who were often left behind. In just 2 short years, Traoré has helped reshape the image of Burkina Faso, from a country struggling with instability to one that now stands for strength, independence, and bold progress. So here's something to think about. If one leader can inspire this kind of change in 2 years, what could other African leaders learn from him? Could they lead with service, not just power? Could they put their people before politics? And what about the bigger picture? Does Captain Ibrahim Traoré have what it takes to shape not just Burkina Faso, but Africa's future too? These are the questions people are asking. Thanks for being part of this journey. Wishing you peace, good health, and success in everything you do. And remember, you're always welcome in the Big Wins family.